Hello, my name is Henry Silverman, and I'd like to take a few minutes to go over some of the concepts we've been exploring. Specifically, I'd like to discuss some of the concepts regarding or answering the question what type of liberalism will govern public health, and also discuss the framework analysis for analyzing public health ethics issues. We've been discussing about liberalism and political philosophy, so what exactly is liberalism? We have an influential thinker, John Locke, and his social contract theory, governing when individuals decide to form a group to provide some benefits to the group. And this social contract theory articulated that only a limited government can be justified in terms of protecting the rights and liberties of the individuals of that group. And indeed, the basic task of government is to protect the equal liberty of citizens. John Locke was very influential with the American Constitution, the life, liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. The whole idea is that people should be free to make rational choices, and political authority and laws must be justified when they limit the liberty of citizens. And we'll get back to this very important concept of justification of government actions for the public good, especially when they tend to limit the liberty of citizens. So liberalism comes from the basic word of liberty. However, there are different types of liberalism. We have on one hand the so-called libertarian liberalism, which has a more of a strict focus on the natural rights of man, life, liberty, and property, and they believe that government should have a minimal effect on liberty constraining actions. Then we have the utilitarian type of liberalism, or otherwise known as welfarist liberalism. Their concept was to maximize utility by achieving the greatest possible collective welfare. When we start talking about a utilitarian approach to public health, that will tend to justify more infringement on moral considerations. And then we have, lastly, a contractarianism or egalitarian liberalism, where there is a priority to certain principles of right, protection of basic liberties, distributive equity, and non-discrimination over policy considerations of net aggregate social benefit. This type of liberalism serves as a constraint on utilitarianism. In other words, rights trump social utility. However, as we will see as we move on through the other modules in this course, we will discuss more about this concept of distributive equity. So in short, the job of public health ethics is to address the central issue, which regards the extent to which it's acceptable for the state to establish policies that will influence public health, and hence we have a setup of this tension between liberty and the collective health of society, which for visual learners, it's demonstrated in the next few slides. So on one hand, we have liberty concerns, and then we have the collective health of society. This slide shows that in a perfect world, liberty and collective health of society never intersect, but as we have seen in the last few weeks, that is not true. That sometimes to enhance the collective health of society, one needs to consider the corresponding constraints on liberty, and depending on your brand of liberalism will decide this intersection circle here. So if you have more of a concept, or not a concept, but more of a predilection of enhancing the collective health of society and if I could say, there's less of a concern on the liberty-constraining choices of individuals. This area here may actually increase. So let me give you an example. Let me show you this slide. What does this map represent? All these states with different colors. Well, at first glance, one may say that this might represent all the states that voted for Obama in the last election. We have the West states, and we have the Eastern Seaboard. Of course, the problem with this map is that it should be blue instead of red. But actually, this map represents the types of Hamlet laws, statutes by state, and we see that actually the states in red represent laws, Hamlet laws that affects all writers, and then the states in yellow represents Hamlet laws that have a age restriction. Then we have a few black states here, which represents restriction based on age and a requirement to have medical insurance. And then we have these two states here in which it appears that there are no restriction on wearing a helmet. So you could see that depending on a state's brand of political liberalism, we have different types of helmet laws. So regarding how to resolve this tension between liberty-constraining actions and public health, we've been discussing Mill's harm principle, and I'm sure you all have this memorized by now. Mill said the only purpose for which power can be rightly exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others, and we're going to flesh out what we mean by harm. And Mill also said that we cannot exercise power over an individual for his or her own good. We could provide him good reasons, persuade him, but we cannot compel him to do something against his will because the individual is sovereign. So before exploring more about Mill's harm principle and the concept of harm, I want to go over this slide, which goes over the types of individual actions. Here we have the voluntariness of an individual's actions, and on this plane we have the adverse effects of individuals' actions. And we have effects that are self-regarding, in other words, actions that only affects the individual, him or herself. And then we have other regarding actions in which an individual actions have effects on society. It is this column rather in which we're concerned about constraining the liberty of individuals if the effects of their actions are other regarding. Now, what about self-regarding harms? Well, if it is thought that we are dealing with an individual who has non-voluntary control over their actions, then it might be justified for society to interfere with that person's actions. But according to what Mill said, that self-regarding actions that are voluntary, we have no right to interfere with a person's voluntary choices. Now, it remains to be seen, how do we define voluntary and non-voluntary? How do we define what types of harms that goes into other regarding actions? Well, or what is the scope of other regarding harms? Well, for sure, if there are direct physiologic harms to society, for example, communicable illnesses like TB, but also on the table are social and economic costs of self-regarding behavior. So, for example, the economic cost of individuals not wearing seatbelts or not wearing helmets. That has a definite economic cost to society, and many of you discussed the issue of economic cost of not wearing helmets, in addition to the issue of injury to the person, him or herself. But as we saw in the previous slide, if the only harm of an individual's desire not to wear a helmet was just to him or herself, then one could say we have no right to interfere with that individual's liberty to not to wear a helmet. However, we are also on the table considering the economic cost, and it remains to be seen how large of an economic cost is appropriate in order to constrain someone's liberty. Now, the issue I want to bring up is this whole issue of paternalism. Public health in general doesn't want to get involved with being paternalistic. However, now I like to explore further this concept of paternalistic actions by the government. When is it justifiable for the government to be paternalistic? Let me go back to Mill's harm principle. Mill again said, for his or her own good, does not provide a warrant for the government to interfere with an individual's self-regarding harms. But essentially the issue is, how do we know when the individual is sovereign? And now we're getting into the philosophical aspect of the nature of someone's will. So let me go back to this slide and just review a few concepts about paternalism, which involves interfering with someone's choices and to prevent self-regarding harms. So we have, if we're interfering with someone's non-voluntary choices, that is otherwise known as soft paternalism. And if we're purposefully interfering with someone's voluntary choices, that's otherwise known as hard paternalism. And again, Mill recognized two exceptions to his principle about when it is justifiable to interfere. He thought it was justifiable to interfere with the choices of children, considering that children choices are non-voluntary, and also people living in backward states of society. Mill's view on paternalism was such that he did not trust individuals to know how to conduct their personal affairs, and he thought that liberty could be suspended for these individuals in order to foster in the future their autonomy, which would enhance their utility. This is why Mill is considered a utilitarianism, because he thought that in order to increase aggregate happiness, that it was important to enhance people's autonomy so that they could increase their own happiness. Essentially, he thought it was important to enable individuals to exercise power for themselves. So again, paternalism, interfering with the liberty action of individuals against their will to protect or promote their welfare. It's considered hard paternalism if we're working against a functioning will of a person, but soft paternalism if we're dealing with Mill's paternalism. How do we define a capacity to make choices? Well, we could say that someone is not exerting voluntary choices if they lack information, if they lack the necessary willpower, if there are social cultural constraints, or if they have an inability to distinguish between short and long range effects of their actions. And again, well, I'm laying the groundwork for when we talk about health promotion activities of the governments, in which case we will further discuss paternalism, and the important question is, what extent of choice do individuals really have in deciding about healthy choices? So getting back to this slide, how do we justify when to limit the liberty of citizens? And we've been doing that for the last couple of weeks using the so-called chart analysis, which incorporates a public health ethics framework. And essentially, one could go back to Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905, when an individual refused to be vaccinated, and the court in this decision said that in every well-ordered society, his liberty may at times, under the pressure of great danger, be subject to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations. This court was highly influenced by Mill's theories about the harm principle. So here we have it. These two phrases in this decision, great dangers and reasonable regulations. So if we have a very important public health problem, and again, in the first week, we all saw that there's some controversy on what constitutes a public health problem, and also what constitutes an important public health problem. But then we'll have to justify any action by reasonable regulations. Reasonableness will constitute the effectiveness of the public health action, the impact on moral considerations such as autonomy and liberty, privacy, confidentiality and stigma, and justice. And we're also embedded with the concept of reasonableness. It's this concept of least infringement and necessity. So this slide shows a summary of the chart analysis or a public ethics framework. We need to ask the question is, in order to provide justification for a particular action, how likely is the public health goal will be accomplished? So what will be the alleged effectiveness? And again, we may or may not have evidence about the likelihood of effectiveness, in which case we have to draw upon theory. And then we have to look at the rationality, which involves asking the question, will the probable benefits of the action outweigh the infringed moral consideration? Now, if the answer here is yes, then we have to ask the next question, is the action necessary to achieve that goal? Essentially, not all effective and proportionate policies are necessary to realize the public health goal that is sought. For example, all other things considered being equal, a policy that provides incentives for persons with tuberculosis to complete their treatment until cured will have priority over a policy that forcibly detains such person in order to ensure the completion of treatment. In other words, proponents of the more coercive strategy need to give supportable reasons that a coercive approach is necessary. Then if we think a certain approach is necessary, we have to see whether that approach represents the least infringement. So for example, when a policy infringes privacy, for example, name-based reporting of HIV individuals, public health officials should seek the least intrusive alternative. So for example, will non-name-based reporting of HIV tests of individuals with HIV will be least infringement on HIV individuals? And the short answer is yes, but some of the statements made in regard to the HIV reporting reveal that some of the public health goals of having a registry would not be supported unless one had names, for example, to avoid duplication. Then we need to ask about the fairness in the application of the intervention. Is the action going to be implemented in such a way that it's fair to all groups who are the target of that intervention? So again, with the name-based reporting, or even with the DOT and tuberculosis, is it being applied fairly to all individuals with tuberculosis? And then we have the public justification. So going quickly over the chart analysis, we have in this chart about the trans fat, and a lot of people discuss well about the burdens of intervention on liberty, but also talked about the limited effectiveness in achieving the goal of decreasing the incidence of heart disease. Will prohibiting restaurants from serving foods actually accomplish this goal of decreasing the incidence of heart disease? And if one thought that the probable benefits were low, then maybe it didn't justify infringing this moral considerations. Regarding helmet use, I think warranting helmet use will decrease the economic costs associated with accidents, head injuries, with motorcycle riding. I think the major issue here is the degree of impact on someone's liberty to not to wear a helmet. What is the extent on liberty? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5 of telling people they have to wear their helmets, as opposed to requiring someone to be vaccinated. Now, having said that, that's only one part of the equation. Again, we have to look at the degree of proportionality. And then with name-based reporting, I think the major discussion with this involved the impact on privacy, but if the probable benefits were great, and many of you discussed that as well, then it may very well infringe on the moral considerations. Again, the other issue is is it necessary? Is name-based reporting necessary to achieve the goal? And I think the answer to that might very well be a yes. Regarding mandatory screening of pregnant women after ACT therapy was shown efficacious in clinical trials. Sorry for some confusion about that example, but essentially there was a time in which we had no therapy for preventing perinatal HIV transmission, and at that time a lot of people were advocating for mandatory screening of pregnant women, but essentially if there was no treatment for that, then there was no reason to screen pregnant women. But after we had therapy to prevent transmission, then it became more justifiable to invoke a very comprehensive screening program for pregnant women. In regards to DOT therapy, it really depends on the necessity of that action, and many of you brought up other means in order to enhance adherence. Our policy on DOT therapy could very well be informed by what's happening in developing countries where many people with tuberculosis live very far away from centers or from public health officials. And essentially, it would be very burdensome to require that someone observe directly someone taking their medicine. So even though a lot of states, or at least in the U.S., we advocate DOT therapy, I think that might not be necessary and may not represent the least intrusive means. And then a lot of people had good discussions on the restriction of the use of antibiotics in cattle. Well, let me end now. Let me just say thank you for your wonderful thoughts in the discussion forum, and please feel free to email me if you have any further questions about this topic. Thank you very much.